Hello and welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the most incredible stories hidden beneath the waves. Today, we're journeying back to the mid-1970s, a golden era of undersea exploration, to join the legendary Calypso team, led by the one and only Jacques Cousteau. Their mission, to find and explore one of the most enigmatic shipwrecks of all time, the Britannic, the forgotten sister of the Titanic. The Aegean Sea is a treasure trove of history, its seabed littered with the ghosts of countless ships from different eras. But among them, one name stood out, a name that whispered of both grandeur and tragedy. The Britannic, launched shortly after her ill-fated sister, she was meant to be an even grander, safer version of the Titanic. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Requisitioned as a hospital ship during World War I, she met her end not in the icy North Atlantic, but in the warm waters of the Aegean, sunk by a mine in 1916. For 60 years, the colossal ship lay in silence and shadow, her story incomplete, her final resting place a mystery shrouded by the sea. Very little was known about her condition. Was she in one piece? What secrets did she hold? These were the questions that fueled the Calypso team. For them, this wasn't just another dive. It was a chance to touch history, to solve a maritime puzzle that had baffled experts for decades. The preparations were intense. This was the 1970s, and diving to the depths where the Britannic lay was pushing the absolute limits of technology and human endurance. The deck of the Calypso buzzed with activity. The team meticulously checked their gear, which, while state-of-the-art for its time, seems almost primitive by today's standards. Heavy compressors roared to life, filling the steel tanks with the precious air that would be their lifeline in the crushing deep. The specialized underwater cameras, heavy and cumbersome, were prepped and sealed. Every gauge, every hose, every regulator was inspected and re-inspected. There was no room for error. The depth itself was a major adversary. At over 390 feet, or 120 meters, the pressure is immense, and the risk of decompression sickness, or the bends, is a constant, deadly threat. Every member of the dive team was a seasoned professional, but even they felt the weight of the challenge ahead. They knew this would be one of the most demanding and dangerous dives they had ever attempted. The atmosphere was a mix of focused professionalism and palpable excitement. They were about to become the first people to see the Britannic in over half a century. The morning of the dive dawned with a sense of promise. The Aegean Sea was unusually calm, its surface like glass, and the currents were weak. It was a perfect window of opportunity. Us divers, clad in their black wetsuits and loaded with gear, plunged into the water. The familiar world of sun and air vanished, replaced by the blue twilight of the sea. Their first task was to assess the surface currents and orient themselves. Visibility was moderate, good enough to see their dive partners clearly, but the true objective was still far below. As they began their descent, the world transformed. The light blue of the surface gave way to a deeper, more intense sapphire, which then darkened to an inky blackness. The water grew colder, a stark reminder that they were leaving the sun-warmed surface world far behind. They descended through the water column, their eyes scanning the darkness, their powerful dive lights cutting cones of white through the gloom. And then, after what felt like an eternity, something appeared. It wasn't a clear shape at first, just a disruption in the void, a shadow that didn't belong. As they drew closer, the shadow resolved into a colossal wall of metal, stretching out of sight in every direction. They had found her. The sheer scale of the Britannic was breathtaking. Lying on her side, she was so massive that, from their initial viewpoint, it was impossible to grasp the whole ship. It was like encountering a submerged skyscraper. The divers were mere specks against her immense hull. As they glided along the ship's flank, a dramatic and violent wound came into view. A massive gash torn into her steel plates. This was the scar left by the mine that sealed her fate, and the subsequent damage from her rapid sinking. The metal, once pristine, was now covered in decades of marine growth and rust, forming eerie, organic-looking patterns. Some sections of the hull had collapsed inward under their own weight over the years, while other plates had been torn and shattered, looking like jagged teeth. The team moved with extreme caution. These old, rusted structures were fragile and unpredictable. The slightest disturbance could cause a section to break away, creating a deadly underwater avalanche of steel. With the cameramen capturing stunning footage of the wreck's exterior, the team made a bold decision. They would attempt to penetrate the interior. This is where the dive transitioned from merely dangerous to truly perilous. Entering a deep wreck is one of the most hazardous things a diver can do. The environment is dark, confined, and disorienting. They chose an entry point and slipped inside, their world shrinking to the narrow beam of their flashlights. The passageways were tight, designed for people to walk through, not for divers laden with bulky equipment. In the silence of the deep, the only sounds were their own breathing and the occasional groaning of the wreck. Rusted metal plates and tangled wires hung from the ceilings, swaying gently in the water displaced by their movement, looking as if they could detach at any moment. Every fin kick had to be slow and deliberate to avoid stirring up the thick layer of silt that coated every surface. Inside, the wreck was even more treacherous. In some arams, the silt on the floor was so fine that a single misplaced fin could instantly reduce visibility to zero, creating a terrifying blackout situation. But through the murk, remnants of the ship's past life were still visible. They saw artifacts from her time as a hospital ship, ghostly reminders of the people who once walked these corridors. Then, they found something that made their hearts pound. In certain sections of the ship, they discovered unexploded ordnance. These were likely munitions that were on board for defensive purposes. Seeing live explosives, 60 years old and submerged in salt water, was a chilling sight. This discovery elevated the risk to an entirely new level. The team knew that any accidental contact could have catastrophic consequences. They carefully filmed these areas from a safe distance, documenting their location, but wisely decided not to venture any closer. Their mission was exploration, not suicide. As they pushed deeper into the ship's labyrinthian interior, the challenges mounted. Visibility worsened, the confined spaces became more oppressive, and the silt was a constant enemy. The beams of their flashlights scattered and reflected off the rusted metal surfaces, creating a confusing and disorienting light show that made it difficult to navigate. The sense of being deep inside a decaying metal giant, far from the sun and safety, was overwhelming. At the deepest point of their penetration, Tay heard a low, groaning sound, followed by a distant crash. It was the sound of a section of the ceiling in an older, more decayed part of the wreck collapsing under its own weight. It was a stark and terrifying reminder that the ship was actively falling apart around them. That sound was the wreck's way of telling them to leave. The signal was unambiguous. The team leader gave the sign, and the divers began a slow, coordinated, and careful withdrawal, painstakingly retracing their path back towards the light. Once back in the relative safety of the open water outside the hull, they weren't done just yet. For the final part of their dive, the team moved towards the ship's bow. This iconic part of the vessel was remarkably intact. Despite its age and the trauma of the sinking, the elegant lines of the bow were still recognizable, jutting defiantly from the seabed. It was a poignant and powerful sight, a final look at the grandeur that was once the Britannic. But the overall state of decay they had witnessed inside sent a clear message. Venturing deep into this wreck was not an activity that could be sustained. It was a place that demanded respect and commanded caution. After approximately 45 minutes of bottom time-in, incredibly long duration for such a deep dive in that era, the team began their slow ascent to the surface. This phase was just as dangerous as the dive itself. They had to make several long decompression stops, hanging in the blue void, allowing the compressed nitrogen to safely exit their bodies. As they finally broke the surface and were helped back aboard the Calypso, a wave of relief and triumph washed over them. Once their gear was off, the debrief began. The consensus was unanimous. The wreck was in a far more dangerous condition than any of them had anticipated. The images and footage they brought back were priceless. They offered the first real look at the Britannic since 1916, providing crucial information about her structural integrity, the damage from the mine, and the process of her sinking. This expedition was etched into the annals of the Calypso's history as one of the riskiest and most rewarding dives they ever undertook. The combination of extreme depth, narrow passages, collapsing structures, and the shocking discovery of unexploded munitions had tested the divers to their absolute limits. But the data they gathered was groundbreaking. It became a foundational reference for all future research and exploration of the Britannic, paving the way for the expeditions we see today. It was a testament to the courage, skill, and pioneering spirit of Jacques Cousteau and his legendary team. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible underwater journey back in time. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. See you next time.